Yeah, so now our topic is exception handling. Okay, so exception handling. What is exception? You have to know, and how to handle it. Also, you have to know. Okay, exception handling is one of the concepts in Java. If you want to like handle the exceptions, we have different ways. We have different ways. Okay, first, if you want to handle the exception, you have to know what is exception. What is general meaning of exception? What is the general meaning of exception? Okay, so suppose uh, if you want to give some, uh, if something is not working, or if there are some items are there, if one item is not good. Okay, so except that item, you will check the other items, right? Okay, which means you are ignoring it. Exception is nothing but giving the ignorance. So ignoring something. Okay, so that handling is nothing but exception handling. Suppose if something is happening, something is causing to your program, some bad thing is causing to your program. What you have to do is ignore that line of code and proceed with the other lines of code. Okay, for example, let me create one package. Exceptions. I'm creating one class, exception example. So I have a method int division. So what division will do? Return some a by b. Okay, int a and int b. So let me make it a static for understanding purpose. So now let me call this method inside my main method. It is accepting two parameters. So 10, 2. So let me print before. Okay, let me do starting division method execution. Division method execution. Ending division method execution. Okay, if I run it, you will get output as, okay, this is also, let me print. Output also I will print. You are getting the output. Okay, 10 by 2, you are getting quotient as 5. This is fine. Suppose if you pass 0, 10, 0, what happens? You are getting arithmetic exception. Divisible by 0, any number if you do, any number divisible by 0 divided by 0, which gives the error. So suppose if you have some calculator, in phone also you can try this. So 10 by 0. cannot divide by 0. You're getting the message. Error generally will get if you try in your phone. So in this case, your Java executor, your JVM, whenever it is unable to execute this statement, execute this logic, it stops its execution and it display some error in the console. Error about that message, like the message about that error. It will print and it will stop execution from here only. See, if you observe here, starting division execution of method is printed. So here it is failing, and the remaining statements, suppose if you have more than one statement like this, these remaining steps also will not be executed. Okay, wherever you get in this statement, if you get exception, error, then it will stop at that same point. So what about these lines? What about the remaining lines? There is no error, right, for printing these. So in this case, if you want to give some exception to this line, okay, to proceed with the other lines execution, okay, we have try and catch blocks. Try and catch blocks. Okay, so try will do, tries that error. Okay, so whenever we are getting the error, so that time we will get that error as a object. Okay, so what is that object that I will explain later. As of now, so you have to use try and catch to give the exception for this line, which means when you use try and catch, this particular line will not be failed. It will fail, but execution will not be stopped at this particular line. So let me run here, run it. See now, here we are getting the error, but it is giving the access to remaining statements. Okay, so giving the ignorance, giving the exception to the statement is nothing but exception handling. Exception handling. With the help of try catch blocks, you can do that. But what is this exception inside a catch method? You have to know. Okay, to understand this. So basically, exceptions are two types. Okay, so one is checked exceptions. Checked are known exceptions. Second one is unchecked. Unchecked or unknown exceptions. Checked exceptions and unchecked exceptions. So checked exceptions are nothing but, suppose if you are writing some syntax error, some int, some equals to 0. Okay, here you have some syntax error, right? So this should be, here you are missing the variable. So suppose int I'm writing as itn, okay, variable as some a equals to 100. So here also let me put 100 to maintain the consistency. Okay, here the keyword error, it is unable to identify this particular keyword itn. This is also checked exception. Checked exceptions. Who is checking? Your compiler itself is checking the exceptions. Syntax errors. Okay, suppose int b equals to, if you assign some string, This is also compiler is identifying this exception. Okay, so you did not provide any relation for this class. Okay, so suppose if you assign some other object, new calculator, here it is unable to identify. This is also one of the checked exception. Okay, it is unable to link calculator object with the exception example because there is no relation between calculator and example. Okay. Similarly, when you are performing the upcasting and downcasting. Okay, so where we are performing upcasting and downcasting in the polymorphism, right? So overriding, let's go to overriding. So here, this is the arithmetic operations object now, right? Okay, this is the child class, overriding arithmetic operations. This you want to assign to your child class. So here you will get error because it cannot directly assign your parent class reference to your child class. So that is the reason again you have to use this notation. Okay. So this is also one of the checked exception, right? So all checked exceptions are nothing but your compiler by default identifies syntax errors, some keyword if you are using, if it is unable to identify that keyword errors, and these upcasting, downcasting related errors, and also sometimes some user defined exceptions. Wantedly, we can also throw some exception. Those by default, it will identify. The user defined exceptions by default, it will identify. Okay, those are coming under checked exceptions, which can be handled by compiler. So those checked exceptions, you have to resolve it. Without resolving the checked exceptions, you cannot proceed with the execution. But coming to unchecked exceptions, okay, unchecked, the name itself is giving the meaning. What is unchecked exception? Okay, if your compiler is unable to check the exception, so here, when you call this division method, it is unable to identify the exception in this statement. This comes under unchecked exception. Your compiler is not checked, which means in the compilation time, you will not get that error. In the execution time, you will get the error. Okay, when I call this at the execution time only, right, we are getting the error. See, when executing this line number 34, so that time it is throwing the error. Okay, so it is completely depends on the data. Suppose if I give 2, it is executing properly, right? It is executing properly. So here also we have to get, okay, so here we are again getting the exception. That is the reason it is ignoring this line. Okay, whenever it depends on the data, okay, we must assume in future we might get some exception on the data. We have to assume, and we have to provide some alternate solution if you want to provide, or print a proper message for that exception. Okay, for example, so here you are getting the error, right? So this line it is ignoring. So as a user, what you will feel if it is not printing anything? Suppose let me execute this. It is not printing anything, right? But as a user, you have to understand what's happening with this line. So in the catch block, you can provide the alternate solution. Cannot divide the value with 0. Please change your input. Okay. So the alternate print statement you can do. See. Or if you want to provide some alternate solution whenever you are passing with the 0. So here you can give 1 and alternate solution also you can provide. So here what I'm doing is I'm calling the method with 10 comma 1. See 10 it is printing. If you want to give the solution, alternate solution, that also you can provide from the catch block. Okay, so these unchecked exceptions, where we get these unchecked exceptions. So where we are getting checked exceptions. So checked exceptions we always get at the compilation time. We must resolve those issues to proceed with the execution. But coming to unchecked exceptions, we get at execution time. Execution nothing but execution time. Technically, we can call it as runtime. Okay, when running only, you will get that error. Okay, so these runtime exceptions, okay, unchecked exceptions, we have to handle with the help of try and catch blocks. So we have to handle before executing our program. Before executing our program. Otherwise, it won't allow you to execute also. So coming to unchecked exceptions, runtime you have to handle those exceptions. Handle the exceptions. Okay, so here, see, whenever in runtime, whenever we get some error, okay, what happens basically in the backend? We have to know. Then only you can understand this concept. So in Java, if you want to write any program, we have to write in a class interface or we have to write in a enum, right? So all your exceptions, whatever the error we are getting as a message, suppose if I enable this, here you are getting 5, right? Let me put it as 0. You will get the exception. So here, if you observe here, this is a arithmetic exception it is showing. Arithmetic exception. All the exceptions are implemented with classes. Okay. So whenever you call some these mathematical operations, so that time it checks and based on that it gives the that corresponding error related class object, which means so when I perform 10 by 0, so that time in the backend your JVM by default throws the arithmetic exception. Throwing the arithmetic exception means arithmetic exception class object it will throw from the statement. Like arithmetic exception. Arithmetic exception. So new arithmetic exception. Okay, whenever we have some class, we can create the object like this, right? It is a class, some class. So in the try catch block, when you perform this operation, it is throwing this object. It is throwing this new arithmetic exception object. So this new arithmetic exception object, if you want to catching means if you want to store into some variable where you can store. This arithmetic exception type only you can store, right? Or you can store into some other class also. Which class? Suppose for this arithmetic exception class, if you have some super class means parent class. In that parent class also, you can store this object, right? Like in overriding, how you are able to store this overloading class object to, okay, so where it is, here, overriding. So overriding class object to parent class. Similarly, here also, for all your exceptions, exception is the parent class. Exception is the parent class. You can store any exception into the exception class object. Okay, so whenever we get any error, that time it will throw the object of particular error. Again, error they defined with the class or interface or enum only. Okay, so here, whenever we say object, we can create the object for only class. For interface, we cannot create, and also for enum, we cannot create. Okay, all the exceptions are classes only. So at the time of getting this error, it is returning this object. And this object we have to catch. Okay, once we catch that object, inside that object, if you have some data, some error related data, that we can access. Okay, so here it won't appear when it is throwing this error, but it exists. Okay, so if you want to catch it, if you want to store to some variable, if you want to store this object to some variable, what you have to do? You have to store into that particular class. Okay, so here also you will not get the error. So let me make it as, okay. See, you're not getting the error. Okay, but here you can use arithmetic exception because it is throwing the arithmetic exception. Suppose if you want to access that error related information through this object, you can access that error information. What is the error? You can use print stack trace is one of the methods. It can print the stack trace, which means the error related information. Okay, here what you can do, you can print the stack trace and also cannot divide the value with 0, changing the value 0 to 1. You are providing the alternate solution and you are calling with 1. So let me run this. See, here it is showing you cannot divide by 0. You cannot divide by 0. So you can divide with 1. Like this, you are providing the alternate solution. So here, instead of printing these lines and all, if you want to print a simple statement, what you can do is obj dot Okay, so get message is the method. It will return string. That string you can print. Okay, you will get divided by 0 some message. See, by 0 divide by 0, so that you can print like how you can print. Okay, so here what I do is instead of handling here, the same thing I handle in the method declaration, in the method area. Here I'm not handling anything. So what I do is, so here I will handle. So try and catch. It is a combination you have to use every time. Try and catch combination you have to use. Okay, in the catch block, that whatever the exception you are getting, that exception class you have to provide. But all the exception object you can store into your exception class. You can simply use exception like this. The alternate solution, what you can do is, so here do try with this, and alternate solution a by 1 you can provide. Okay, so these two lines I'm copying to here and print here. So this I want to make it as obj get message. Okay, here a, your value by 0, your value by 0 is not possible. So not possible. Okay, so changing the value to 0 to 1. With the 1 you are providing the alternate solution. Suppose if you call, you will not get the error. See, 10 by 0 is not possible. Changing the value to 1, 0 to 1, then the result is 10. Okay, so here result result is 10. Suppose if you pass 10 comma 2, it acts like a normal one, result 5. So whenever we get any exception, okay, it should not affect to the other lines of code. In one line we are getting some exception, it should not affect to the other lines. If you get exception, then ignore that line and continue with other lines code execution. Okay, if you want to do that, so you have to handle that exception with the help of try catch block. Okay, in the catch block section, what you can do is you can handle that object, whatever the object we are getting as a error, that object you can handle. By default, when you do some here it is returning some object, right? The particular object you have to mention here. Suppose if you are getting arithmetic exception, if you want to print that exception also, the name of exception that you can get with exception name, exception name. So obj dot get message full stack get message, we have get, we have one method to get only the name of that class. Okay, what we can do is get class. What it will return? It is class it is returning, right? Okay, dot get name. If you run it, it prints the exception name. If you pass 0 as a divisor exception, it is a arithmetic exception. 10 by 0 is not possible. Changing the value to 0 to 1. Okay, so you can provide some alternate solution, and also if you want to print, if you want to show some message to the user, how we are getting for the calculation, how they are showing. Similarly, we can also do the same, which means somebody is implemented with some Java code, which means they also used these exception related concepts. They are displaying that message, whoever implemented that calculator. Okay, so let me open one screenshot. Yeah. See, if you observe here, unchecked exceptions and checked exceptions. These red color are all red color are wait, all red color are checked exceptions. All these red color are. The green color ones are unchecked exceptions. Runtime exception, null pointer exception. Okay, and also we have similarly like exception, we have also error. Error is also one of the classes. If you observe the naming convention, all these are classes. But coming to throwable is a interface. It is not a class. Throwable is a interface. In the throwable, you can see the same methods, whatever we have in the exception class. Okay, the same methods you can see, you can import into the IO exception class if you extend the exception class. If you extend the file not found exception, again, the methods whatever we have, like get message and also get a print stack trace, all these methods you can get into your child class. Okay, so runtime exceptions, unchecked exceptions, you have to handle by your own. Your compiler, it won't responsible for your runtime exceptions. What if it is failing somewhere, which means that you are responsible for that. You are not your compiler. You have to handle it properly. This is fine. Okay, so using try catch blocks, you can handle the exceptions. So we have few more checked exceptions. Few more checked exception means, so let me create one user defined exception. So here I'm creating new class. What I will do is bank transactions or bank transactions error, bank transaction error. Okay, I'm creating one class. So if you want to generate your own exception, what you have to do is you have to extend exception class, because exception class is the base class for all your exceptions. Okay, so you have to extend this exception. So now you can throw the error as a bank transaction error. Okay, bank transaction error. So here, let me create one constructor. Public constructor I'm creating. Here I'm accepting one message, string, error message. Error message. Or let me do one thing. So let me create one more global variable, string, error message. So the message which I am passing, that I will store to the global variable whenever we have same names, global variable and the local variable. To differentiate, what we have to do, this. Okay, so now I will print that message. I will print that message. Let me write one more method, public void get. We have used some methods, right? Print stack trace. So it is returning string. It is returning string. You can return this string, error message string. Error message string. Okay, what is the return type is incompatible with the print to stack trace. Okay, by default it is printing the message. See, you cannot override other signature method. Void print stack trace. Again, we are getting error. Illegal modifier. Public we should not use. Print to track trace. Create a interface or wait. Okay. So here by mistake, public. I will also write one more method similar to the exception class. Print stack trace and message, get message. In the get message, I will return that message. SSAG, get message. In the get message, I return that message. Whatever I'm initializing through the constructor, that I will return. Okay, here it should be string. This is my user-defined exception. Whenever I'm performing the bank transaction, it has to display some error if there is a illegal transaction. Okay. So now let me create one class name itself, bank transactions. Bank transactions. Finish it. So we already used one bank transactions example, right? So where it is in the encapsulation, it is there. Bank transactions. Let me copy this entire thing. Let's put it here. Okay, so why we are getting error here? Bank transactions. This name also bank transaction only, right? So let me remove this import statement. Okay, any spelling mistake? Okay, so here IN is missing. TIONS. Okay, let me refactor and rename it. Finish. Okay, these are your bank transactions. So here, whenever you are depositing, whenever you are withdrawing, okay, whenever your balance is low, that time generally what happens in the like bank transactions or in the ATMs, the process itself stops at that location only, right? It will directly stop the transaction and it will eject your card. It will reject your card. So here also, if you want to stop the transaction, withdrawing, suppose if you are withdrawing something, so you can throw the error. What error? Bank transactions error. Here you can pass it as a insufficient balance. Insufficient balance. Okay, so here you are creating the object, but you must throw that object. Throws. Throw that object, not throws, throw object. Okay, whenever you are throwing the object, it is asking to declare the exception at method level. This is mandatory step. Add throws declaration. Okay, which exception you are throwing? Bank transaction error. Bank transaction error you are throwing. So inform your compiler to whenever you withdraw something, it might throws the bank transaction error. Your compiler knows that this particular method throws bank transaction error. Okay, suppose here, let me create a new class that is use or transactions class. Okay, so from here, I will copy these transactions. So whenever we are withdrawing money, withdrawing check balance, why we are getting check balance? Okay, so remove. This is fine. We don't have the check balance inside this bank transactions method. Bank transactions, check balance also we have. Fine. But why we are getting error? Let's see. Change visibility of methods public. Change visibility of methods public. Why? Okay, this I won't import from the encapsulation. Yeah. So whenever you withdrawing the money, see by default, it is showing some error. Your compiler is showing some error. Why? In your user defined exception, you mentioned that this method might throw the error. Okay, throw the error. Which error? Bank transaction error. So you have to handle it. This is also checked exception because your compiler is checking that it is throwing the bank transaction error. Okay, in this case, to avoid this error, here you are not handling the exception. Okay, to avoid, to say to your compiler, okay, ignore this error, what you have to do is you have to declare add throws declaration, or you have to handle that try catch block. Otherwise, this statement will not be executed. Okay, that is the reason you can do throws declaration. Same thing you can do. Okay, so this main method also throws the bank transaction error, ignore it like that. So now if you run it, you are getting, see, bank transaction error because you have insufficient balance. Insufficient balance. You deposited, I mean, like some 5 lakhs. How much it is? 5 lakhs. Okay, so when you check your balance, it is showing deposit. It is not depositing, first of all. Okay, so the actual amount is 1 lakh only. But when you're trying to withdraw 1,25,000, it will throw the error and the transaction stops at that time only. Suppose in your bank, if you provide again some more options instead of canceling that transaction, if you want to give some options like check balance, some other options, what you have to do, you have to handle this exception and you have to provide the alternate solution. Okay, here use the try catch block. Use the try catch block. So here, which exception it is throwing? It is throwing the bank transaction exception, which means bank transaction object it is throwing. Bank transaction object. This object you can store into your exception class, or you can store into your own bank transactions class. Anything is fine because exception class is the parent class for your bank transaction. If you go to your bank transaction error, it is exception, derived from exception. Okay. So now in the transaction class, the same thing. Why you are getting the message? If you want to display get message or get print stack trace. Sorry. So this is the object, right? From this object, get print stack trace. It will print the error, that error. Insufficient balance. See, it is printing. It is printing the insufficient balance message. Then your account balance it is showing as 1,000. Suppose if you don't want to check before your transaction. Insufficient balance. Suppose if you are having some account types. So here deposit. Here also when you are performing the deposit, if you want to stop the transaction at that level, what you can do is you can throw your bank transactions error object. Error object, the message you can print whatever the message you want to display. So that message you can provide. Okay, so here also in the method level, okay, inform your compiler that this method might throw bank transaction error, add it. And when you call deposit in your transactions, deposit, why it is not giving error deposit? This is deposit only, right? Go to bank transactions error, not error, transactions. This is fine. Then why it is not giving the? Okay, I think you already handle that error in the transactions. You already mentioned in the method level, right? Which means your compiler will understand that in all these statements, you might get bank transaction error. So now if I run it, I will get, after checking balance, I'm getting the bank transaction error. If you want to display some proper message, you have to use try catch blocks. Try and catch. So here you are getting error. So you have to catch with exception or bank transaction error. Anything is fine. You can print that stack trace. Whatever the message you are initializing, that will be printed in the statement. See, deposit amount exceeding daily limit, please deposit less than 2 lakh. Then when you do this transaction insufficient balance, if you don't want to like handle it, if you cancel the operation at that place, okay, no need to handle it. For example, the best example is whenever you are purchasing something in the e-commerce application like Amazon or and Flipkart. Okay, so once you add your item to your cart, once you click pay option, okay, after entering all your details, okay, so if your details are incorrect, what happens? It won't book that item and it won't generate the invoice, right? It won't generate the invoice also. The transaction cancel at that place only, and it won't generate the invoice also. Okay, if you want to stop few things, if you like here, I don't want to generate the invoice. In that case, what I can do, I can perform that, I can stop that action at that place only. Okay, that time I won't handle the exception. At that point only, it will stop the process. Again, it starts from the fresh. Okay, if your details are incorrect, if your payment gateway is not accepted your details, in that case, if you generate the invoice, that is incorrect, right? Okay, so that time you can create the user defined exception and you can stop that transaction at that same line only. Okay, suppose let's consider this part is for generating the invoice, this part is for entering the payment details and confirming the payment. Okay, so here in this line only, if you want to stop the execution. Execution means the next process. Next process is this, generating the invoice. Okay, it will not go to the next. It will not go to the next process. Or you don't want to stop the execution. Okay, I want to provide some alternate solution. Alternate solution like I will navigate to the home page. Here in the catch block, you can do that, and it will go to the, and this part again you have to put based on the condition, you have to again execute this based on the condition. Here you will set some flags as transaction true or false. If transaction true, then execute this, like that you can put. You can continue the execution, okay, by handling with the conditional statements. Okay, so like this we can create our own exception and also we can handle the exceptions. Okay, we have one more thing. Suppose, let me do one thing. What I do is, let me take new class. Okay, so here exceptions, examples. So let me create, finish. So here with the plain example, I will explain. Okay, if you want to do it with your methods, that also you can do. I have int a equals to 10, int b equals to 0, string string 1 equals to, I'm not assigning anything. Whenever you are not assigning anything, you can assign it as a null. Okay, the default value for string is null, right? For global variable, suppose if you have some global variable, static string global variable, if you declare like this, if you print global variable, by default, what it will print? So it will print the null. Okay, for all your user defined classes. So string, if you look at the name of the string, it is starting with capital letter. Okay, so this is also a user defined class. This is also user defined class. For all your user defined classes, you can assign the default value as null. That is the reason it is showing as null. Okay, if you print string 1 also, it prints the null. Whenever you perform any operation on null, suppose if I want to get the length of the string. So to get the length of the string, we have length is the method. If you try to perform this operation, you will get the null pointer exception. Whenever you perform any operation on null, you will get the null pointer exception. So for suppose, so in the annotation example, here we are trying to perform something on the null. That is the reason we are getting the null pointer exception. Okay, here it is taking that class. It is not taking that class object. Annotations it is not taking. So that is the reason we are getting the null that I have to check. Yeah. So here in the exception example, here you are getting the null pointer exception. Okay. So let me write one more thing. So here, if you have some method, void method 1. Okay. So here, this is method 1. So you can create null, you can assign instead of creating the object, suppose exception examples, you can create the object like this, right? So if you don't want to assign the object, if you don't want to assign the value, what you can do is simply you can assign null to this, null to this. If you try to call the method 1 with a null object, you will get again null pointer exception. Okay, let me comment here. You will get the null pointer exception because nothing is there in this object. Null is there. You cannot perform any operation. Similarly, I want to perform A by B. So I want to print division of two numbers. Division of A by B. Division. Let's A by B. You will get the arithmetic operation, arithmetic exception. Okay. So here you have more than one exception, right? More than one exception. If you want to handle more than one exception, what you can do is you can define more than one exception class reference in the catch block. For example, sorry, try catch block only you have to do, right? Try. So try and catch. Okay, so here in the try section, I put this. In the catch section, here we have more than one type of exception. Okay, one is arithmetic. These two are null pointer exceptions, right? Null pointer exceptions. If you want to handle more than one exception, so you can simply handle with the exception class E. Because for all your exceptions, exception is the parent class. Okay, so E, if you pass E dot get message, if you print it, okay, the corresponding error related message it will print divided by 0 you are getting. Suppose if you are passing 2, okay, you will get the null pointer exception. String 1 is null. Okay, suppose if you are assigning some string, hello, you will get the exception at method 1, because method 1, to call this method 1, you don't have the object. Suppose let me comment it, let me enable this one. So now I will get all. So here, if you want to handle more than one exception, you can directly handle with the exception E class, or you have one more option. You can use like arithmetic exception or null pointer exception. You can specify like this. Suppose if you don't pass, if you pass the 0, it will handle the arithmetic exception. Suppose if you are passing 2, and if you are passing the null in the string or null in the class object, it will handle the null pointer exception. See, like that, you can pass more than one error. And also, if you want to put, finally, if you want to put exception, yes, you can put the exception also. So here it is not allowing because you can handle everything by exception class. Okay, if you want to put another exception, you can, that also you can do. This is one format. Okay, so one more format is the same thing you can do in another format. You can say arithmetic exception like this. E. You can also write one more catch block with null pointer exception. Okay, so suppose if you're passing 0, the first block only will be executed and it will shows by 0. And one more important thing is, suppose in the try block also, if you get exception at this line, again it won't execute the remaining statements. Wherever you get the exception, there only the execution stops. Okay, this try block, what it will do is, up to this part it will skip, and from here again it will start the execution. Okay, so suppose if you pass 0, it is handling the null pointer exception. Suppose if you pass 2, sorry, it is handling arithmetic exception. If you pass 2, it will handle null pointer exception. Okay, if you are passing everything, then it will not throw any error. The execution will do normally. Okay, so along with that, we have one more block, that is finally block. Finally block. So here, if you want to use finally block, you must have at least one catch block. Okay, so here I'm putting 2 catch blocks. You should have at least one catch block, to use the finally option. Okay, we have one more keyword finally. Okay, here the use of finally block is whether you get or don't get the exception, this finally block will be executed always. Okay, suppose if you are passing 0, you will get which exception? Arithmetic exception. This statement will be printed and also finally block will be executed. See, finally block also executed. Suppose if you are passing as 2 and this one I'm making as null, you will get the null pointer exception, it will handle, and also finally block also will be executed. See, suppose if you don't have the exception, in this case also finally block will be executed. See, in all cases finally block is executing, which means this finally block you can use to perform the tear down operation. Tear down operation generally we call it as, once we done everything, if you want to dismantle few things, if you want to destroy few things, you can use the finally block. For suppose if you open a database connection, you are performing some database operations. Okay, if you open a database connection, again if you don't close it, some exception is happened while you are performing some operations after opening the database connection. In the middle, some exception happened and process is stopped. So in that case, you must close the database connection. Okay, in the catch block also you can do. Generally, we won't do that because if no error happened, it won't execute the catch block. If there is no error, here there is no error. That is the reason it is not executing the catch block. Again, your database connection remains open, right? So whatever the action you perform, whenever you get error or no error, so after done with your work, if you want to destroy few objects like database connection object, if you want to close, you can do with the finally block, whether you get error or not. So let me print that system.out.println opened database connection. Okay, so here we are doing close database connection. So let me remove finally block. Okay, let me remove finally block. If I run it, if everything is good, okay, it is database connection is closing. Suppose if I make it as 0, your database connection is still open. It is not closed. Okay, suppose if you make it as null, your database connection is still open. So instead of this, instead of closing your database connection here, if you use the finally block, okay, whether you get the exception or don't get the exception, it always executes. See here, with error I'm executing. With error also it is closing the connection. Okay, so what I have to do, close the connection. With error also it closes the database connection. Without error also it will closes the database connection. Okay, yeah. So this is exceptions if you want to handle. Okay, tomorrow I will start arrays, after that collections. So there you will see all these concepts. So till here your oops concept is over. Tomorrow usage of your oops concepts. Now till now we have discussed oops concepts. From tomorrow we will use those oops concepts, okay, using collections. Okay, before collections I will explain arrays. Okay, until unless you understand arrays, you cannot understand the collections. Okay. Yeah, so let me stop recording.